When I was asked by our partners to come and speak to highly successful agency leaders, I was really excited. I said, this is great. I talk about culture. They probably don't understand what I'm talking about. And then I go out and have a drink in the evening and everything will be fine. And how little did I know. So when I learned more about what I was supposed to speak about, I became a little bit frightened and said, well, as I said, highly successful agency leaders in the marketing domain, what will I tell them? You know your field better than I do, much better, and where's my value add? So in any event, one thing before I get started that you probably want to know about me is that my career started in a psychiatric hospital. But I'm quick to say not as a patient. That's really important. But the validity of that statement is that working with 7 to 9-year-old children that are highly depressed was a huge learning experience that I could transfer over to executives in large organizations because there's lots of similarities. The thinking that I had before I came here and before I started to panic is how can I explain the impact on culture, on organizational performance in less than 30 minutes. And one of the things that I remembered was when I worked for Texas Instruments in marketing, we had a big presentation coming. And as we walked, the visitors of an extremely well-known marketing agency, American marketing agency, into the meeting room, went by the office of the CEO. And the CEO came out and said, Karl Heinz, who are these people? And I said, well, these are the people you're going to meet in 10 minutes to talk about the next communication plan. And he said, they look like as if they're giving me a big fashion show, send them home, I don't talk to them. And I was shocked. I said, well, we can't do that. These people have come over, they want to talk to you, you invited them. But he didn't, because he said they have not understood of who we are, because if they did, they didn't show up the way they have. That was sort of a learning for me, which at the time I didn't really understand the significance of. But what I do know is every time today, because we are a small agency in Europe, a larger firm, but relatively small in Europe, going to a client really means you need to understand how the client functions internally. And I took some notes from the speech this morning, which I found really interesting. The panel who spoke about it's all about talent, it's all about culture. Paul Holmes spoke about integrity, honesty, and credibility. It's all about culture, which is interesting. There seems to be a huge awareness about the fact that culture and talent and people play a big role. So where I'm trying to go with this is, I don't know if you're familiar with this statement, but there was a lot of talk about social media, and of course culture is always related to something that is really soft and doesn't generate impact. Well, here is something that happens. This employee from Goldman Sachs who put a blog out, and the share price of Goldman Sachs as a result of that blog dropped by $2.15 billion in less than 48 hours. So people who are not happy with the culture of the company they work in can do a big damage very quickly today. And the reason I'm showing that is to bring the link a little bit about the soft stuff as we perceive it, the impact that the soft stuff as we perceive it has on organizational performance. So when we talk about culture and the relevance to you, and I apologize up front if I say something that may be evident or normal for you and you deal with every day, is how does my internal culture not only impact my relationship with the clients, but how does my internal culture that I have in my agency, in my company, impact my performance for my own company? And there is a really important link, because the word engagement that I heard a lot earlier today has a significance in the fact that it talks about the employees in a company, in your agency, whether they are engaged or not, and how much discretionary performance they're going to show in working with you and for you. But really, when we talk about what does it feel like coming into your company and how do you actually connect with the company that you're working with, is a reflection of how the people present themselves to your clients. So when we talk about culture, what I like to say is look at the hidden elements of it and on the visible ones. And one of the hidden elements, the parts of culture that are below the waterline, they have to do with the assumptions that people make, your employees make about your agency, the beliefs they hold about your agency, and how they represent those beliefs to the outside world. That's an extremely important thing. I give you an example. For one company I work with, where I interviewed the executive team, and each member of the executive team said, well, I don't know really why you're here, because we know that our headquarters will shut us down. And my reaction to that was, if you really believe that the headquarters is going to shut you down, it will happen. Because the behavior you will display, the reaction you will have to things that happen around you will be defensive, will be negative, and most likely you will not produce the results that are expected from the headquarters. But that was so deep in the employee base that something had to happen to turn that attitude around, so that the employees started to have a positive mindset and working in the interests of the company that they were working for. So the question is, what drives your company? I don't know that. What drives your company? What is your internal culture? How do people feel about what they do for you, and how does that relate to the outside world? Because the reality is that the dimension or the tension that you manage all the time is, on the one side, to look to the external world, because that's influencing you, that's what you're reacting to, and then at the same time manage the internal world to make sure that things happen internally to serve the clients that you have. So there is a permanent tension between external and internal. And one interesting question would be, how much time do you spend looking externally versus looking internally? And that was one of the very interesting things that happened during in my perspective, happened during the last panel this morning, when there was a lot of discussion about people, about talent, and about culture, and what it means to the performance to the company. There were statements made which I found interesting, that I don't know if I get it completely right, but the people who worked in PR 2 years ago may not be the right people working in PR today. I don't know if that is true, but if it is, that is a significant shift and will have a big impact on your clients. And what we get from the culture is typically from what we don't see. It's based on the behaviors of the employees. It's very much behaved of how the function or the company works internally. Doesn't matter about size. It doesn't matter whether it is a big multinational or whether it's a small company. It is basically the same. It does not make any difference between the two. So what's the definition of culture? We like to say culture is the way things work around here. And there are rules, there are processes, there may be regulations internal. I don't know. It's the whole infrastructure internally, the way we work around here, the way we show ourselves internally and externally. But more importantly, culture is what happens when people feel that they're not being watched. That's when they behave most naturally. And the question is, how do they do when they feel they are not watched? Do they still do those things that you want them to do? If you bring this back to your own company, are you sure that the things you want to happen all the time? Or are things going on, is there a dynamic going on internally when people feel free that they can do what they think is right to do? What do they talk about? When they are around the coffee table, do they talk positively about what's happening in the company, or do they not talk positively about what's happening in the company? What's the climate that is actually developing internally? So the real question when we talk about culture, and I really want you to reflect just 1 minute on the next slide that I show you, is culture is all about habit. Things that work will be repeated, especially if they have a positive effect or if they have a perceived positive effect. People will repeat them. They say, I did that, it worked, I will do it again. And so it becomes a routine over time. The biggest danger of routine or habit is it creates complacency. And if the process starts to derail a little bit, we don't detect that. It derails very slowly. We see it when it is too late, and we create waste. We, in the engineering world, which you're not in, but in the engineering world, people always say waste is created by habit, by routine jobs. Routine jobs always create the biggest waste and loss in a company. So if you look at the next slide that I want to share with you, well, what we're saying is we have good habits and we have bad habits, and some of our habits are old and some of our habits are new. So if you just reflect 1 minute, do you have in your own company bad old habits? And what are they? And what is even more interesting, when you have that discussion with senior executives around the table, which I test oftentimes, and I ask the question to everybody, okay, take 15 minutes and write down what the bad old habits are in your company, and then write down what some of the good old habits are, and report back. Invariably, somebody's good old habit is somebody else's bad old habit. And now we have a problem. Because if we want to change, if we want to twist the culture in the organization, if we want to make it a little bit more positive, whatever that means, but we see a need of changing how we operate, how we function, and we have a different view of what is good and what is bad, most likely nothing is going to happen. And we're stalling. Especially when we say, let's introduce some good no habits. Things that we're going to do different. I would be fascinated just to have the discussion right now here in the room, if we had enough time to say, sit down for 10 minutes, talk to your neighbor, think about your agency, and ask yourself, what are some of your bad old habits? Unless you tell me you don't have any. Let's have a show of hands. Does anybody have bad old habits in your agency? Right. Isn't that interesting? And how do you get rid of them? How do you make sure they don't negatively impact your employees, they don't negatively impact the organization as a whole, regardless how big it is? I'm just back from Russia, where I'm working with a large Swiss pharmaceutical company that is expanding in Russia. Now think about Switzerland into Russia. That's already a very interesting tension. And they said, we want to replicate the culture we have in Switzerland because it's a really good corporate culture that we have. We want to bring that corporate culture into Russia. Managed by a Russian management team, entirely Russian management team. There is no Swiss on it. And after 1 year, they said, it's not working. Well, what a surprise. What a surprise. So not only do you need to connect locally with what the local culture looks like, but you need to collect organizationally. Because what is of value in Russia is not necessarily of value in Switzerland and the other way around. And so there is a very strong connection between performance and the culture that drives performance in the organization, because culture is about the collective. I mentioned engagement a little bit earlier. I don't know, but some of you may run engagement surveys or use engagement surveys. But think about the questions of engagement surveys. Every single question starts with I. I will recommend this company to friends. I'm happy with the salary. It's always an I question. And it is a natural tendency of people to say, well, I'm engaged, nobody else is, but I am. But culture is about the collective. Culture is about the collective behavior of employees and how they work for the company they work for. And that produces a very different set of results. And we measure that and we know that. When we see a positive engagement survey and we run a culture survey, the result of the culture survey is always more negative because people are more honest. They think about the collective, they don't think about themselves. And so the interesting thing that I found when you talk about culture, it has, and we see this, and we have seen it over 25 years now, is that the dimensions that bring people together in an organization are always the same. They repeat themselves. Number one, employees want to know where the company is going. What's our vision? However you express that. It does not need to be a big academic exercise, but where is the company going? And how do we get there? And when you set the vision, did you involve your employees? Which does not mean your employees need to agree with everything you do or validate it, but they want to feel involved, that they were part of the development. That creates a positive dynamic. Do we work as a team or are we in silos? Do we understand what our customers want? And do we have the infrastructure to actually support that? Or do we ignore what our customers say? We have one question in the survey, which is a fascinating question. It's a very simple one, which goes, core values will bring you in trouble. And if you see a really low score, which we see very often, what that says is something happened in our company that suggests that we don't need to implement or abide by a code of conduct. And that comes back to what I heard: integrity, honesty, and credibility. It's a fascinating thing. It's one of the most sensitive questions we have, and employees are very honest when they answer that, when they know that it's not the I question, but it's the we question. So we look at those things and compare them, understand that really a healthy culture in an organization is independent, and it came as a surprise about 12 years ago, is independent of geography, it's independent of industry, it is the same. Whether if I have a high-performing culture in Japan, it looks the same from a result base as a high-performing culture in Italy or in Sweden. And that says that we have somewhere a dynamic which suggests that employees are looking for the same thing. The discussion about the Generation Y, which makes me a little bit sick, that these people are so different, they don't look for the same values that we do, or Generation X, or the almost dead people like me. It's not true. They look for the same thing. They look for meaning. They want to understand where the company is going. They want to contribute, and they want to try to do the best. They come to work for a purpose. If there is no purpose, they're not interested. So the point I'm trying to make is that the way a company functions, the way we do things around here, has an impact on the results you produce, and it has an impact on the clients you work with. which is exactly the same for me. If I walk into a family business in Switzerland, in the luxury good area, they will look at me, and in 1 minute I'm classified whether or not I'm an acceptable person in their organization. And I cannot force myself upon them because they have specific standards. So bringing that to a closure, one of the things that is important to note is that employees are loyal to culture, not to strategy. They're loyal to culture, not to strategy. The statement was made earlier, I think you made it. You know, a lot of people have said, I can leave the strategy on an airplane seat. It would not make any difference if my competitor reads it. It doesn't even make a difference internally, so it will most likely confuse the competitor. But having a culture that is unique cannot be copied. You just cannot copy culture. It's not possible because it's made up by the employees. And that's why employees look at the company today and say, is this a company I want to work for and I want to work in? And that means that getting the right culture in your organization starts with hiring the right people. Once they're in the organization, it's too late if they don't fit. There is such a thing like a motivational fit, and there is such a thing like an organizational fit. So do my values match the values of the company, and can we work together? Culture is a differentiator. It does lead to innovative solutions. Things that are different, things that make a difference with clients, things that clients look at. You know, how do you differentiate yourself as an agency from what you do? Which is true in any other market as well, but you are selling something which other people may see as intangible. But how do you differentiate yourself on intangibles? I think innovation is a really important thing. And more importantly, if you think about that statement here, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. Bring a different perspective. Challenge and look for conflict. I was fascinated by the discussion about the two ways of communication. We either cooperate or we're in conflict. I don't think there's anything bad about conflict. The big inventions of that century were not made because people agreed. They were made because people disagreed. The question is, how do you manage that conflict? Conflict is a good thing. It surfaces dimensions that we may not have thought of. And in my time in Hertz, we had a big culture change. We went from a private company to a private equity-owned company. And our private equity owner was a gentleman with the name of Jack Welch. Working for Jack Welch is not fun. I can tell you that. I had to deal with him every quarter for 3 days. But boy, do you learn. And I learned so much from him. And he said, look, you run a $30 million budget. You better tell me what you produce out of that. I want to know this. And if you go from a company which is privately owned by another company called Ford, who saw Hertz as nothing but a company that turns over inventory, because we had to rent 40% Ford cars. And you go suddenly to private equity who introduces Lean Sigma, where the CEO is an ex-Tenneco GE guy. This is a culture shock, and you have to make a big shift. Well, we introduced the model of change, and at this time I was on the other side. I was not at Denison, I was in Hertz, but I used the Denison model. In 4 years, we contributed $148 million in pre-tax simply by changing the way we operated at the front line. Think about car rental. Cost of switching is 0. You make a better experience with the red color next time you rent the yellow color or the blue color or the green one. There is no cost of switching. Car rental companies lose 80% of their customers every year, 82% of their customers every year. So only to retain 20% of those has a huge impact on the revenue you generate. But it's a frontline loaded business. It's a people business. It's like you. You are in the people business. And the frontline people in a car rental company make the difference between a success and a failure. And that was one of those things that we needed to change, because the frontline and the culture that they portrayed to customers was totally unacceptable. So it has a big gain. And so one of the things, the questions I want to leave you with, not a big moral statement, but have you spent enough time exploring your culture? Do you know what it is? Do you know how it functions? And do you know what impact it has on your clients? And that's really a question that I suggest you think about, because some of the answers, especially when it comes to the good old and bad old habits, may have a surprise that you may not have thought about. Thank you very much for your attention.